Shalom, shalom, shalom. Shalom aleichem. Peace be with you. Rabbi Roger Fearing here again of Chaim by Yeshua Ministries here in Sandusky, Ohio, with our second full session of understanding the Hebrew roots of Christianity. Now, I hope you've been watching or you've watched the other 3 videos that I've produced on this subject of Hebrew roots of Christianity. But if not, go to my YouTube channel. It's under Rabbi Raj, Rabbirog, where I've got other teachings, along with some Messianic worship music by Paul Wilbur. You'll enjoy that. It'll really put you in the spirit. But for now, I want to focus on these 4 videos that I've produced. I want to take you step by step into a deeper knowledge of understanding that will enhance a more intimate relationship with our Creator God, Jehovah. But before we go any further, though, I want to let a particular verse of Scripture be a kind of a foundational understanding into all that we're going to embark on while developing that relationship with our Creator. It's found in the writings of the prophet Hosea, whose name means in Hebrew to save. Hosea is also the root word for the Hebrew name of our Messiah, Jesus, which in Hebrew, as I've said before, is pronounced Yeshua, which actually means the word salvation. Matter of fact, if you go into the scriptures of the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and any place you find the word salvation, if you substitute it with Yeshua or Jesus, you'll see that it actually enhances the verses that you've read. So the verse I'm talking about is in Hosea chapter 4, verse 6, where it says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I also will reject you from being priests for me. Because you have forgotten the law of your God, I also will forget your children." Now that's a pretty powerful statement. It's saying that if you're not interested in acquiring more spiritual knowledge regarding Him, then you cannot be a priest or be in any exalted position in His kingdom. And in addition, He says that if you do not desire to understand His Torah, which is really the word for instructions, but we call it the law, or if you have knowledge of them, but have forgotten them or considered them as immaterial to you, then He may not call your children on Him or to Him. And that's based on another scripture found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 5, of the 10 Commandments. Let me go there. Where it says, "For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me." That's heavy. Over in my lesson, my last lesson, session 3, I said I wanted to take you into a deeper understanding of the importance of the Hebrew language and the understanding of names, because names describes who that person is in God's eyes and their destiny. Now, we were in Genesis chapter 10, verse 21 in our last session. So let's go back there. Genesis chapter 10, verse 21. And I'm also going to include verse 22 or 25. So we turn there. Okay. It says there, and children was born also to Shem, Noah's son Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder. And the name of Shem's son Eber, if you remember, meant a region beyond. It also says that Eber had two sons named Peleg and Joktan in verse 25. Let me read that. Verse 25. To Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, and in his days the earth was divided. Pay attention to that. And his brother's name was Joktan. Now, Peleg means division. Joktan means smallness. So the name Joktan could mean his physical stature, or it could mean his family position. But the name Peleg, because of the contents of the statement in the scriptures, it had something to do with the earth itself. Now, geologists believe that the continents of the earth at one time were actually one large landmass. And the description of the creation of the earth, it says that when God said, let there be land, it said that there was one, that the seas were in one place. So that kind of verifies that somewhat. But then the geologist says that millions of years ago, the earth expanded and there was a dividing of the continents. But the scriptures describe a worldwide flood that took place 4,300 years ago. And that after the flood, Noah's son Shem, it was after the flood that Noah's son Shem had a grandson that God called Peleg, which means, because of the context, or the content, that the earth divided. So which was it? The geologists and their science, or the scriptures, which is said to be truth? If it was a biblical occurrence, then it was probably a gradual event, and people began to cross back and forth over both land masses over a long period of time as time went on. Of course, via boats. And so they also, the people that crossed over began to be known as, in the Hebrew language, Ebers, those from beyond the region, because, they were divided. Now this probably became more prevalent, though, after the Babylon event, chapter 11 in Genesis on. And this would account for all the different nations, including the ones beyond the seas. As the continents got further apart and the seas became more prevalent. And these would have been developed what we call the American continents, North and South America. And evidence of that is the things that are found in ancient artifacts and their similarities, because they're found on both continents. Same types of artifacts. Now let's look at some other names, including their meanings from here on. We're going to look at the names and the ones that we usually can't pronounce in the baguettes. In Genesis chapter 5, that's the part of the scriptures that we skip over when we start to try and read the Bible, one from front to cover. Those right there in Genesis, that's in Genesis 5. But before we do that, let's look at the name that God gave to the first man he created, Adam, in other words. Adam has a Hebrew root meaning, or a Hebrew root word, which is Adah, which kind of sounds like Adam or Adam. But the word Adah is a root word for three other meanings. We've got man or mankind, that's the most prevalent meaning. But it also means, or it can mean, soil or dirt, because that's found in their word, the Hebrew root for them. And also for the color red. So this brings us up to a question that a lot of students of Scripture have. They say, what race was Adam connected to? Or they'll ask, what was his skin color? Well, I think that when we look at that root word, Adah, that I mentioned, it wouldn't take much imagination to guess what his skin color was. You see, Jehovah God created his first man, Adam, from red dirt. So I would assume he had a brownish or reddish complexion, like the American Indians, both North and South America. Now, today you can also find many people, what are called Bedouins, who live in the Arabian deserts, because they have a reddish skin color also. And from this, if you add climate and diet to the equation, you can get the different races and physical features of mankind. And then there's other factors that could be considered too, that would play a part in these differences of appearances. Like, what part did the mark that was put on Cain, and what part could that have played in appearances? And then there's the genetic tampering that the fallen angels from Genesis chapter 6, what they could contributed to the equation, because of their copulation with the women of the earth. Well, we're going to explore that in a later session, because that could have had quite an effect on that subject of what people look like. But let's go back to the subject of the names in the Hebrew language in Genesis chapter 5. So we're going to begin with Adam's prime meaning of his name, which is man or mankind. So keep that in mind. The meaning for Adam was man or mankind. And then going down through the next 10 generations, which would be from Adam to Noah, we're going to find two different prophecies that are hidden within those 10 names. So after Adam's death, after the death of Adam and Eve's son, Abel, who was murdered by their other son, Cain, the scriptures say that Adam and Eve had many other sons and daughters. But there was one special son who was named Seth, and he's found in the first part of Genesis chapter 5. When Adam was 130 years old, so he may have had a lot of sons and daughters up to that point. But Seth was a son that was a very righteous son, and I think the Lord concentrated on him because he was kind of like a compensation for the two sons that they had lost in the beginning. Now Seth would go on to carry what is called the righteous seed, which would continue down through the generations to a particular appointed woman, a virgin, who would receive this righteous seed or divine seed, and that would produce the birth of the promised Messiah. Therefore, his name, Seth, would hold the meaning of appointed. So now we have man or mankind appointed. Now let's continue. Now after Seth, who had also had many sons and daughters of his own, this righteous seed that he carried would have manifested itself when Seth was 105 years old, and they named him Enos. But Enos merely means mortal man. Then after Enos, when he had many sons and daughters, this righteous seed brought forth a son after 90 years named Canaan, which means sorrow, or sorrow is born. Now, this raises a question. Why did God list the names from these four descendants since Adam among all the other sons that were born? Because he wanted to point out through a prophecy of the miserable lost state that sin had brought to mankind. The names of these four sons spell out the first part of this prophecy, because we would have Adam, which was mankind, Seth, appointed mortal man by Enos, is born into sorrow. Canaan. So you see what you have here? Mankind is appointed, that mortal man is born into sorrow. Now, in other words, because of sin and iniquity, man only has death to look forward to. But there is a second part to this prophecy. After Canaan, when he had sons and daughters, after 70 years, or up to 70 years, he also had a righteous son named Mahalalel, or Mahalalel, which means the glory of God. Now Mahalalel, when he had sons and daughters, and he had lived 65 years, he had a righteous son in Yah's eyes named Jared, which means come down. So now we have the glory of God come down. What came down in his time, for the word come down, was 200 fallen angels, the ones I mentioned earlier, which copulated with some of the women of earth and produced giant offspring, who were hybrids, half human and half angelic, which began to pollute the bloodline of mankind. As I mentioned in my introductory teaching, I said that we would discuss this later. Well, we will. We're going to discuss it in our next session, so don't miss it. Now, Jared, who lived 62 years while having other sons and daughters, and eventually he had a righteous son that he named Enoch. You've heard of Enoch. It means teaching. Now, Enoch also had sons and daughters before having his righteous son, after 65 years, named Methuselah. And we also heard of Methuselah. What does Methuselah mean? It means bringing death. Now, Enoch himself seemed to be righteous in Yah's eyes because he never tasted death, because he became the first person to be raptured or caught up to be with God after only living 365 years on the earth. Like what, a year for every day of a year? And according to the book of Enoch, which was mentioned by Jude in the New Testament as a prophet, said he made many trips back and forth from heaven to earth and witnessed the activities of the fallen angels and their mischief. And Jude talks about their being chained up because they left their original state. Now, Methuselah also had many sons and daughters, of course, before he produced a son after, 187 years, whose name or who was named Lamech, which means despair. And then finally, the 10th descendant from Adam and Lamech, after his having many sons and daughters, and lived 182 years, he had a righteous son named Noah, which means rest or comfort. So when we decipher these last 6 names, we come up with the prophecy that says, the glory of God shall come down, teaching that his death will bring those in despair rest and comfort. Chapter 5 of Genesis gives us our first 2 prophecies about the coming of the Mashiach, or Messiah, called Yeshua in English, and of course Jesus as we know him. Okay, now that's all we're going to cover in this session. But I want you to join me the next time when we'll explore further about the fallen ones that Enoch wrote about. So until then, Shalom Aleichem. Amen, Amen, and Amen.